Boeing, the latest victim of the trade war between the U.S. and China, a 737 MAX jet intended for a Chinese airline has now been returned back to the U.S. Let's discuss the broader fallout from the tariff turmoil. Ambassador Ron Kirk, current senior counselor at Gibson Dunn, joins us, former U.S. trade representative and former mayor of Dallas. It's good to have you, Ambassador Kirk, and you were trade rep during the Obama years, which we should mention, different side. But I wonder how realistic you think this 90-day window is for negotiating trade deals with some of our closest trading partners. You think it'll happen?
You know, Sarah, I think like many of our American businesses that are suffering under this arbitrary trade policy, we're hopeful that it will, because it just feels like the way the administration has escalated tariffs, particularly on China, that they haven't left themselves much room for a thoughtful resolution. So if in this 90-day period of time somehow the United States and China can each back away from increasingly horrific tariffs that are going to hurt both economies, but I don't know that hope is a strategy. But I would guess, given the numbers that you all have been looking at, that most of our American businesses and exporters in particular are hoping the administration will find a way to at least lower the temperature and, if not, de-escalate some of these tariffs to a more reasonable level.
Agree. I mean, the Democrats have been, both Republicans and Democrats have been complaining about China and unfair trade practices for years. And, you know, here's the president finally doing something about it. You might not like I think you used the word chaotic approach, and it might be unnerving investors here. But ultimately, if it leads to better terms, are you on board with it?
Well, if it does, but you don't, if we were going after China and doing it in a way that engaged our allies and other important trade partners that could put pressure on China to do many of the things that administrations of both parties have been critical of, that would make sense. But that's not what this administration did. They came out with a hammered our closest longtime allies from Mexico and Canada to the European Union, Japan, Korea. That doesn't bode well, excuse me, for our trying to build the kind of coalition that's necessary to constrain China. And then I think we have to be careful, Nicole. We are in for a different period of engagement with China. And that's largely because of the policies of President Xi and his retrenchment to a much more closed economy. That is a war we need to be prepared for, but we've got to be thoughtful about how we're going to do that. But I think it's a mistake if we only look at trade as the only way to combat China. And what I mean is that if we're going to take China on, we shouldn't be restricting, cutting back investments in math and science and next generation technologies. We shouldn't be attacking our major colleges and universities. We shouldn't be closing our borders, throwing out of the country university students from other countries, because we're going to need all of that talent, all of that technology, all of that engagement to have a long-term strategy to not just contain China, but to grow our economy.
Meantime, Mr. Ambassador, some work over the weekend looking at how long historically it's taken the U.S. to develop and sign a major trade deal. Some argue it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 months. So I'm wondering what you think any trade deal in the next 90 days could possibly look like.
Well, this won't be a trade deal, Carl, in the sense, you know, of a traditional trade agreement, say like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, ironically, that this administration walked away from in their first term. These are just going to be agreements between countries to de-escalate the tariff war, say between the U.S. and Korea or Japan or what other country that they agree to something that allows this administration to save face, in particular for those individual tariffs that the White House announced a few weeks ago.
So you think more like agreements in principle?
Look, I think so. This has been more performative than it has been traditional trade policy. As you know, this has totally bypassed Congress. The administration is doing this all under the guise of the Emergency Economic Powers Act, which has never been used before to put tariffs on. And what we've seen for this administration in particular is that if they want to do something, they'll do something and then figure out a way to paper over it. What I'm hearing from America's businesses and farmers, they just want some relief. And I don't think they're going to quibble over how that gets done.
God, you mentioned the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partner. It feels so vintage at this point. I mean, even Biden did not return us to that sort of trading relationship with our Asian partners. I remember when Obama went to Nike headquarters to announce it.
Well, it was. And ironically, much of what this administration is complaining about could have been resolved had we utilized that particular trade agreement, which would have anchored us in the fastest growing economic zone in the world under, for the most part, American principles that protected our intellectual property, that restrained the ability of foreign governments to put their thumb on the scale in non-competitive ways. But we walked away from it.
Yeah, I don't think either party's talking about it now. Ambassador, thank you very much for your perspective as someone who's been there. Ambassador
As always,
Kirk.
thanks for having me.